This happened about a year ago. It was summer vacation, and at that time, I was living with my mom and dad in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the USA. Our house wasn't very big, but it was comfortable. There were other houses around us, but our backyard had quite a bit of open space, so the area was usually very quiet in the evenings. My parents mostly stayed home. I honestly don't remember the last time they had gone somewhere for a trip. But that summer, they suddenly decided to go away for 2 or 3 days. They asked me to come with them, but I refused. I wanted to stay home alone. After they left, I felt like the whole house was finally mine. No one was there to stop me or tell me what to do. The next day, I invited one of my female friends over. It was extremely hot, so we decided to spend some time in the small swimming pool in the backyard. We were having fun in the water for quite a while. She kept splashing water at me, and I splashed it back at her. At that moment, I was just enjoying the freedom because I knew I might not get another chance like this anytime soon. But suddenly, my eyes moved toward the house. Something appeared behind one of the windows. At first, I thought it was just the shadow of a curtain. But then I realized it looked like the silhouette of a person standing there. It wasn't moving at all. It was just standing behind the window, watching us. I stared at it for a few seconds. A sudden chill ran through my body. I narrowed my eyes and looked again. The shadow was still there. I thought maybe my parents had come back early. But that was impossible. They weren't supposed to return for at least another 2 days. I didn't tell my friend anything. I was afraid that if I told her, she would panic and immediately want to leave. So I looked away and tried to ignore it. A few minutes later, I looked toward the same window again. There was nothing there. The window was completely empty. I tried to convince myself that my eyes had simply played a trick on me. We went back to messing around in the pool. But about 10 minutes later, we suddenly heard a noise coming from inside the house. I got out of the pool and stared toward the house. My friend asked, "What happened?" I said, "Nothing. Maybe something fell inside." But deep down, only one question was running through my mind. If there was nobody inside the house, then whose shadow had been standing behind that window? We both quickly came inside the house, and I locked the back door. I looked around the entire house. Everything seemed completely normal. My friend laughed and said, "Maybe you're just overthinking it." I smiled and brushed it off too. But in my mind, I couldn't stop thinking about that window and the shadow standing behind it. After a while, we went upstairs to my room and started watching TV. Around 11 p.m., the TV suddenly turned off. The screen went completely black. I picked up the remote and tried turning it back on, but the TV wouldn't work. At that exact moment, we heard a faint sound coming from downstairs. It sounded like someone was slowly opening the front door. My friend looked at me. "Did your parents come back?" I immediately said, "No. They won't be back for another 2 days." We both sat there silently for a few seconds. Then we heard footsteps coming from downstairs. The footsteps slowly moved toward the staircase. My friend grabbed my hand. The fear on her face was obvious now. I quietly closed the bedroom door and turned off the light. The footsteps began coming up the stairs. Then suddenly, the footsteps stopped. We both held our breath. A few seconds later, a very quiet voice came from outside our bedroom door. "Are you alone?" My friend's hand started trembling. I covered her mouth with my hand so she wouldn't make a sound. For a few moments, everything outside was completely silent. Then a shadow appeared underneath the bedroom door. Someone was standing outside. I didn't have the courage to get close enough to look underneath the door. Then suddenly, the shadow disappeared. We both breathed a little easier. But just then, a notification appeared on my phone. I picked it up and looked at the screen. It was a motion alert from our backyard security camera. I opened the live feed. And what I saw on the screen almost made me drop my phone. Someone was standing in our backyard. It was the same dark silhouette. But this time, it wasn't behind the window. It was standing right beside our swimming pool. And the scariest part was, it wasn't looking at the camera. It was looking directly toward the window of our room upstairs. As if it knew exactly where we were hiding. I immediately told my friend, "We need to get out of here." We quietly left the room and started going downstairs. But then we heard the same voice from below. "Are you alone?" My friend started crying in fear. We ran outside and went straight to our neighbor's house. I told them everything, and they immediately called the police. The police arrived and searched the entire house, but they didn't find anyone inside. When the officers checked the backyard security footage, the shadow could be seen moving around our house for nearly 20 minutes. But the scariest part was that its face was never visible on the camera. The next morning, my parents came home. I told them everything that had happened. They had the windows and doors checked, but there was no evidence that anyone had broken into the house. It has been a year now. I no longer live in that house. But even today, whenever I see a shadow behind a window at night, I remember that night. Because I still don't know the answer to one question. Was that shadow a person, or something else? This happened in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio, United States. At the time, I lived in a small 2-story house with my wife and our young son. Our neighborhood was considered very safe. At night, the streets were usually empty, and most people were inside their homes by 10 p.m. One Friday night, at around 1:47 a.m., I suddenly woke up. I thought I had heard a car door slam outside. I looked through the window. The street was completely empty. I was about to go back to bed when suddenly, our doorbell rang. I sat there silently for a few seconds. Who could possibly be outside at this hour? I quietly woke my wife and told her, "Someone is outside." She immediately sat up, frightened. I turned off the hallway light and opened the security camera app on my phone. The camera showed our front porch. But there was no one there. I felt relieved. Then, the doorbell rang a second time. This time, something strange appeared on the camera. A person's shadow was visible near the edge of the doorway. But the person himself wasn't in front of the camera. It looked like he was standing just around the corner of the house. I didn't make the mistake of opening the door. I called 911. About 10 minutes later, the police arrived. The officers searched around the entire house, but they didn't find anyone. Before leaving, one of the officers told me, "Probably just some teenager playing a prank. Still, keep your doors locked." I locked the door and tried to go back to sleep. But at around 3:12 a.m., I received another notification on my phone. My security camera had detected motion. I opened the video. A man was standing at the far end of our driveway. I couldn't see his face. He was just standing there, staring directly at our house. Then he slowly raised his hand and waved at the camera. A few seconds later, he disappeared into the darkness. That night, I decided that as soon as morning came, I would replace our entire security system. But the next morning, when I opened the front door, there was a small piece of paper lying on the ground. There was only one sentence written on it. "I know you're awake." And the scariest part? We never saw anyone enter the house that night. I spent the entire next morning thinking about what had happened the night before. My wife kept telling me that we should leave the house, but I felt like someone was simply trying to scare us. I watched the recordings from all the security cameras around the house again. In the footage from around 3:12 a.m., the same man was standing near the end of our driveway. But this time, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. After waving at the camera, the man slowly turned his head toward the upstairs bedroom window. That was my son's bedroom. A chill ran through my body. I immediately went upstairs. Everything inside my son's room looked completely normal. But his window was slightly open. I closed it and looked outside. There were footprints on the ground below. They came from the backyard and led directly underneath my son's window. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't want to frighten her even more. That night, I had my son sleep in our bedroom, and I stayed awake. At around 2:20 a.m., the power suddenly went out. The entire house went completely dark. A few seconds later, I heard a faint sound coming from upstairs. It sounded like someone was tapping on a window with their finger. I slowly walked up the stairs. I had a flashlight in my hand. The sound was coming from my son's room. I opened the door. The room was empty. But someone had written something on the inside of the window glass with a finger. Just 3 words. "Look behind you." I froze for a few seconds. Then I heard someone breathing behind me. I slowly turned around. But there was no one there. Suddenly, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. For several seconds, there was complete silence on the other end. Then a low voice whispered, "You should have left." The call immediately disconnected. At that exact moment, my wife started screaming downstairs. I ran down the stairs. She was standing near the front door. The door was still locked. But there was a small box sitting on the porch outside. My name was written on top of it. I didn't have the courage to open it. I called the police. A short while later, officers arrived and carefully opened the box. There was no weapon or anything dangerous inside. There was only an old family photograph. The moment I saw it, I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. It was a picture of my family. The same picture we had taken in our backyard just 2 days earlier. But the most terrifying part was the figure standing behind us in the photograph. It was the same man. The man who had been standing in our driveway that night. And we had absolutely no idea that he had been there when the picture was taken. The police searched the entire house after seeing the photograph, but they couldn't find anyone. They advised me to stay somewhere else with my family for a few days. That same night, we left the house. At around 6 a.m., I received a security camera notification on my phone. I opened the recording. The same man was standing in our backyard. But this time, he was holding a piece of paper. He held it up directly in front of the camera. Written on it were 4 words. "You forgot something." I immediately went back inside the house to check. My son's teddy bear was gone. After that, we never went back to the house. A few months later, the police told me that they had discovered a hidden room inside an abandoned shed behind our old property. But who had been living in that room? My name is Edward, and this happened to me in the fall of 2018. At the time, I lived with my wife and our 8-year-old daughter in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Columbus, Ohio. It was one of those places where every house looked almost identical: green lawns, white fences, and peaceful streets. After 10 p.m., the neighborhood became so quiet that you could hear the wind moving through the trees. Everything seemed normal, until the family across the street suddenly moved away. Their house remained completely empty for months. One Friday night, I got home late from work. As I pulled into my driveway, I glanced at the abandoned house across the street. Someone was standing in the upstairs window. The figure didn't move. I assumed it was a real estate agent or maybe new owners checking out the property. But when I looked again a few seconds later, the figure slowly stepped backward into the darkness and disappeared. The next morning, I asked my elderly neighbor, Mr. Anderson, if anyone had finally bought the house. He looked at me for a long moment before quietly saying, "Don't look at that house after dark, especially the upstairs window." He refused to explain any further and walked away. That night, at exactly 2:17 a.m., my video doorbell alerted me that someone was at the front door. I checked the live camera. No one was there. Then I played back the recording. The porch was empty. But at the very end of the video, across the street, the same dark figure was standing perfectly still in front of the abandoned house, facing my home. My heart started pounding. I looked outside through the window. The street was completely empty. Just as I locked the front door again, I heard slow footsteps coming from upstairs, right outside my daughter's bedroom. The sound of footsteps upstairs made my heart race. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and slowly walked up the stairs. The house was completely silent, but I could still hear someone pacing back and forth outside my daughter's bedroom. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. My daughter was fast asleep. There was no one else in the room. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The bedroom window was wide open. I knew I had locked it before we went to bed. I quickly shut the window and looked across the street. The abandoned house was completely dark, except for the upstairs window. The same black figure was standing there again. This time, it slowly raised one hand and pointed directly at me. Terrified, I immediately called 911. About 10 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived and searched my house from top to bottom. They found no signs of forced entry, no footprints, and nothing that could explain the footsteps. One of the officers walked toward the abandoned house. He suddenly stopped and stared at the second-floor window. For a few seconds, he later admitted he thought he saw someone standing there. But when he shined his flashlight into the room, it was empty. Before leaving, the officer looked at me seriously and said, "Keep your family inside tonight. If you see anything else, call us immediately." As soon as the patrol car drove away, the entire neighborhood lost power. Everything went completely dark. I looked back at the abandoned house one last time. This time, there wasn't just one shadow in the window. There were 3 dark figures, standing perfectly still. All of them staring directly at my house. The sight of all 3 shadow figures standing together froze me in place. I immediately woke my wife and daughter, and the 3 of us stayed in the living room for the rest of the night. None of us had the courage to go back upstairs. Around 5 a.m., the power finally came back on. I looked across the street once again. The upstairs window was empty. Later that morning, the police returned. This time, they forced their way into the abandoned house and searched every room. Thick dust covered the floors, cobwebs filled every corner, and it looked as if no one had lived there for years. Then they found something disturbing in the upstairs bedroom. One wall was covered with the names of every family that had ever lived across the street from that house. At the very bottom of the list, a fresh name had been written. Edward. My name. Even the officers were shocked. No one could explain who had written it or when it had appeared. That same evening, I decided to sell my house. A few weeks later, my family and I moved to another city, leaving that neighborhood behind forever. About a year later, I searched online for information about the abandoned house. I discovered that over the past 20 years, several families who had lived directly across from it had suddenly moved away without giving any reason. Even today, something still terrifies me. Every once in a while, my old doorbell camera cloud account uploads a new recording on its own. The video always shows the empty street in front of my old house. And in the final frame, the same 3 dark figures are standing silently, staring at my former home. The strangest part is, I changed the password to that account years ago. Yet the recordings have never stopped.